Welcome to Someone Talks, the official podcast of the National D-Day Memorial, where leading experts spill all the secrets of the Second World War. With your host, Dr. Jon C. McManus.
Greetings. Welcome to Someone Talked. I'm your host, Dr. Jon C. McManus from Missouri S&T, and alongside, as always, are my dear friends and partners in crime from the National D-Day Memorial Foundation, April Cheek-Messier and John Long. How goes it today?
Fantastic. Excited to dive into a little bit of the Pacific War today.
Looking forward to this. It's going to be a good one.
Yeah, we have on a guy who's a legend, certainly in his own mind. But, I think to many of the rest of us, too, Jon Parshall, who, of course, almost needs no introduction, but just for the few people who may not have heard of him, John is really like one of the leading naval historians on the planet. Obviously, incredibly conversant in most anything World War II, but particularly the Pacific War and the Imperial Japanese Navy. He is the author of one of the seminal works on the Battle of Midway called Shattered Sword, which he co-authored with Tony Tully. He's, what hasn't he done? But he founded a website called CombinedFleet.com, which is really one of the kind of fascinating kind of think tankish kind of informational websites. And anyway, just all around good guy and nice enough to join us today. How goes it, my friend?
It goes. It's a little interesting here in Minneapolis right at the moment, but we'll just leave that right there. I'm chuckling about your description of my website, because when I look at my website, I'm like, that is original vintage 1995 HTML handcrafted, code there, and it looks it. I mean, it's an ugly site, but it's got a lot of good stuff on it, even so. And I'm amazed that it's still in operation after all these years.
It stood the test of time. I mean, see, from you're a software guy. That's what John did for a lot of his career.
Yeah.
And so you're looking at it with that practice eye. For the rest of ignorant people like me, I'm looking at it. I'm like, oh my God, this is just an incredible naval site.
And to give props to the people that actually do all the work. I mean, I think the real claim to fame for that site now is just all of the TROM data, the track records of movement of all of the Japanese warships during the war. And I didn't do any of that. That was actually people like Sander Kingsepp and folks like that, Tony Tully to a large degree as well, which I think is sort of an interesting case study for what happens early in the interwebs. You build these sites and people would come out of the woodwork, and I just kind of handed them the keys to the car and said, you want to put your stuff here, knock yourselves out, go crazy. And it turned into something that I couldn't have imagined, and that has stood the test of time, as you say. So I'm very pleased by that.
Yeah, well, it's the best of what we associate with the internet, which is, in other words, like furthering knowledge. Oh, what a concept, right? I mean, using that forum and collecting the expertise of a lot of different kinds of folks that just builds over time that historians, like you and me, can use as source material. How often do you update it now, or does it just kind of live on its own?
I never update it. I haven't worked on the site in more than a decade. But they're, I'd have to go out there, and they publish the little update logs and that kind of stuff. It's not as active as it used to be, but Tony still has a forum out there, and he, is answering questions and doing stuff like that. So yeah, it's still live. It's just trundling along, I guess I would say, rather than racing along these days. So yeah, I've been busy with other stuff. I've been writing books, and doing stuff like that. So.
Well, John, you've also had a hand. You can tell us a little bit about your role in the podcast, The Unauthorized History of the Pacific War, which is fantastic. I mean, there's so many you guys cover so many topics in that. And can you tell us a little bit how that idea got started and your role in it? And
sure.
And I'm interested too, and because with all your books, how do you feel like it allows you to explore the Pacific War differently from just your writing, your academic writing?
That's a great question. So the podcast was actually started by two other guys, Seth Paradin and Bill Tody. And Seth, I've known for years. He worked down at the World War II Museum in New Orleans for a really long time. He was the guy who was in charge of their oral history program down there. And he interviewed thousands of U.S. vets. And so he's on top of that sort of corpus of knowledge. And then Bill Tody, interesting guy, retired U.S. Navy fast boat skipper, who then went into industry and worked for Hewlett Packard and a number of other companies. And so Bill sort of brought the professional warfighter angle to the podcast, and, professional Navy guy, knows a lot of things about, how do you navigate a ship, stuff like that. And then I ended up being a very frequent third wheel for them, and did a number of podcasts like a lot of the stuff that was happening in Guadalcanal and some of the later war stuff as well. Long story short, Bill had to step away. He is actually working again for the Pentagon in shipbuilding. And so Seth needed a co-host, and that became me about 9 months ago or so. And we've just kept charging along with it. In terms of, the difference between how the podcast works and how my writing works, there's less difference than you might think, in that I have always tried to take a fairly conversational approach to my writing style. And I think that the podcast, one of the reasons it appeals to people is that very intentionally the vibe is we're sitting on a bar stool, just yakking about something that we love to talk about. And you, our listeners, are invited to be hanging out with us in the same bar about 3 feet that way. So that's kind of how we roll. And I'll say that Seth does put a lot of preparation into each episode. He will come out typically with anywhere from 10 to 14 pages worth of notes beforehand, and then I'll go ahead and add stuff back into the notes, mostly from the Japanese side or what have you. So we are working off of a set of material that's in front of us, but again, we very much want the vibe to be conversational. So it's been a lot of fun. The channel has grown. We've got about 60,000 subscribers now, which I'm blown away by. It never ceases to amaze me that that many people actually want to hang out with us on a weekly basis and listen to us blather. But yeah, it's been a fun ride, and we got a lot of great stuff lined up for future episodes. We're branching out a little bit in that we're bringing in some additional guests to talk about their books. John is, Dr. John has been on the channel a couple of times with us, and I think we want that to continue because we've sort of covered the war at this point. We're actually going back now and starting over and doing a lot of the early war stuff again. But part of what we're trying to do too is just bring out good scholarship in the field. And so if we can bring on a guest who's written a good book that we want to bring to the fore, that's a win.
Yeah, I mean it's quite a resource actually, because the episodes are really informative, and I think you're north of 500 episodes now, something crazy like that.
I don't know. Yeah, it's a lot.
Here's what I wonder about it. I mean, I have a lot of questions about it. I love being on the pod, by the way, John. It's just I always have. I mean, it's amazing. So Bill Tody was the skipper of the USS Indianapolis, I think, a nuclear submarine. And of course I've known Seth for years too. He's a buddy of mine. He's such a fantastic guy, and like you said, I mean, I don't think there's anybody who knows more about interviewing World War II veterans than Seth, because obviously I mean it's just incredible. And I've used a lot of the interviews that he did, because this isn't as widely known as it should be. I don't know how you see this, John, but in my opinion, it's not as widely known that enormous corpus that they have of the National World War II Museum, and those are digitized and available. You can just punch it up and there you go. And what I love about those interviews is they're so well organized, and it saves you a lot of time. It tells you what to find where. And Seth did a lot of those interviews, and you can just tell how informed he was about everything. Just incredible. So how did he get together with Bill? And the format, and I always wonder too, he prepares these extensive notes, which is incredible to me, time wise. And how did that whole culture get started? And what gave wings to the whole thing in the beginning? Were you around at that point, or?
No, well, yes and no. So there was a TV show that was shot a few years ago looking at all of the various shipwrecks that Paul Allen's team had found over the years. And I was a part of that TV show as well. But Bill and Seth met on the set of that. They had both been brought out to do, some of the shoots for that around the Indianapolis. And so they were having a beer one night and they were like, we should do a podcast. Yeah. Okay. Let's do this thing. And very intentionally, again, the vibe from the beginning was, and the whole thing is going to be, we're just sitting on bar stools. So that's what we're going to do. And we're going to put 3 of these things out and nobody's going to watch, and that'll be it. That's literally what they told themselves. And so that's how it started. And, but that's not how it ended. Obviously, people glued into it. I too am just blown away by Seth and his ability. We'll be doing an episode, and this has happened on more than one occasion where Joe Schmo was not in the interview notes, but we'll just kind of segue into, oh yeah, and I remember this Marine was, on this hill, and he told me, and and he's just got all of that, and because he knew all these guys, it's amazing. As for the culture of preparation, some of that was due to the fact that I think Bill was not as comfortable on camera as Seth was. And so Seth wanted to make sure that there was always things that Bill could be keying off of to, time his remarks and that kind of stuff, that Bill would always have the ability, if he didn't want to be spontaneous, that he'd go back and say, okay, yeah, let's talk about what happened at this location with this gentleman. So it started off there. With me and Seth, it's a little more informal. Yeah, we've got those notes just because I want to know that I've got that material if I want to look at it, but we're referencing it perhaps a little less. And I will say that one of the other things we've been doing more of recently is looking at archival footage, because Seth has got a ton of that too. So those are great for us because frankly, we're lazy, and it's nice not to have to prep 14 pages of notes, for these archival things. There have been numerous occasions when, like for some of the pre-Midway footage that we went through. Yeah, I went in and looked up some plane codes and that kind of stuff. So we've got 2 or 3 pages of notes, but not 14. And mostly it's just like, we're just going to roll this film and we're going to riff on it. Let's go. That's fun. So, yeah.
Well, I think you're bringing up all this culture of preparation just to shame us, because we make it up as we go.
Sorry. And that's great.
Well, we would prepare, but J-Lo, John Long won't let us.
Yeah,
That's right.
And also, I'm amused by this idea of a Pacific War podcast, because Pacific War, World War II was one day in June of 1944 on the coast of Normandy. I don't know what else there is to talk about, but actually, right? No, it is a great podcast, and certainly recommend it. But let me ask you maybe a personal preference question here. What are 1 or 2 popular misconceptions about the Pacific War that just really stick in your craw?
Oh man, there's and I've been beaten into submission by my good buddy Dr. John, and in that I am no longer of the opinion that it was primarily an air and sea war.
That's progress. Yay!
Yes, you can be taught.
And which ground service generally took the lead? Which one?
Why the Army had 1.7 million combatants in the Pacific by the end of the war. No, I laugh about that. That's actually been a very good conversation to have had, and I think that brings up another central point. One of the things that we quip about during the podcast all the time is always learning, right? Our audience, which we refer to collectively as the nerderati, are constantly pointing out things to us where, yeah, we screwed up a ship identification, or we got this guy wrong, or whatever. And that's great. I love that. I think that a lot of people get really annoyed with the image of an historian as someone who's got these huge ego needs wrapped up with always being right. That's just it's so dumb. It's so boring. And you do run into that. I hate to say it, on a lot of military history forums and that kind of thing. You just run into these people. It's just like, oh my God, come on. Do we really have to get the number of barrel twists in the 7.7 millimeter machine gun that was in the Zero correct? And if we don't know that, then we don't understand anything about what's happening in the Pacific War. Dear Christ, Anyway, back to your original question, misconceptions. I guess the other big one that I've been sort of fighting against for all these years, even though I'm a guy who wrote a book on the Battle of Midway, I don't think that people understand the nature of what we would call decisive battles or turning points, that we have a tendency to look at these individual battles within the larger context of the Pacific War. And Midway is the classic one, turning point, changed the entire war. And yes, it was a very important battle, but it did not determine the course of the war overnight. I think that sort of the classical definition of a decisive battle has always been that he who wins that decisive battle is also going to win the war. And there are a lot of examples in earlier wars and smaller wars where that would be the case. I mean, you look at, I don't know, some of the battles against the Swiss, by Charles the Bold or something like that. Yeah, you lose that battle, that's pretty much the end of the war too, isn't it, Bubba? But World War II was not like that. World War II is this vast, interconnected, sprawling war with a lot of interplay between individual theaters. And I would argue that even a battle as climactic as Midway doesn't settle that war in any sense. That lose or win at Midway, the United States still had such a disparity of productive power over the Japanese that as long as we can retain the political will to stay in that war, we're going to win it. What Midway gives instead is it creates a sense of parity within the broader Pacific context, where you've now got parity of carrier air forces, which allows the U.S. to come out of this defensive crouch that we've been in for the first 6 months of this conflict and start contemplating how it is that we want to counterattack. That leads directly to Guadalcanal. And that, I think, the Guadalcanal campaign, those 6 months are extremely important to the overall trajectory of the war. I would argue that the Guadalcanal campaign is decisive in some senses. But what Midway is sort of like the gift that keeps on giving. It's the gateway event that allows Guadalcanal to be created. So,
well,
anyway.
we can identify these turning points because we have the end of the story.
Bingo.
And, they didn't in 1942. It's a big battle, it's an important one. Momentum is shifting, but it could shift back as far as they know.
Absolutely.
So, that's an important point. Another aspect that to me, and mainly because I talk to a lot of students, is people don't understand the geography of the Pacific War and how big this theater was.
Yeah. So I lead tours for the National World War II Museum, and I'm like Mr. Pacific. I've done 15 tours for them at this point, I think. And we used to, our earlier rendition of what I would call our mainline tour would be to start in Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, do 2-3 days in Pearl, and then we'd go out to the Marianas. And that was kind of an eye-opener for a lot of people because they get on an airplane, they fly for 8 hours, they end up in Hawaii. We do our thing, and then we get on another airplane, we fly for another 8 hours, and we land in Saipan. And you know what? You're still in the middle of the freaking Pacific Ocean. It's so big. One of the jokes we have in the travel group that does the Pacific, my tour managers, it's like anybody can go to Belgium, right? I mean, you get on an airplane anywhere in the United States and 8 hours later, you're anywhere you want to be in Europe. If you want to go to a place like Peleliu, you got to suffer. I mean, it takes a hell of a long time to get out to some of these places because, to your point, John, the area of campaign is just so enormous.
Yeah, I mean, it's 1/3 of the world's surface of ocean and continent and island, and that's the area in which they're operating. Which, I mean, when you think back at how they organize it, there's no way you could have had one theater commander in charge of the whole thing, even if the Army and Navy could have agreed. Of course, there were some people who thought differently at the time, but how would they have even done that?
I don't know. I think that Chester could have run the whole thing. Maybe I could have put Eichelberger in charge of the South Pacific area, and that would have worked just peachily under Nimitz's overall command. I think MacArthur is an edge case. He gets to be a theater commander because he's too senior and too laden with political dynamite to be brought home, and FDR wants him kept at just planetary remove, if at all possible. And that's the only reason I think that he didn't get cashiered. I mean, his performance in the Philippines was miserable.
Horrible.
It's execracious. It's terrible.
Yeah.
And if he'd been anything other than what he was, he would have been either cashiered or sent to a training command for the rest of the miserable war. There's no way that he would end up a theater commander. It's ludicrous.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he has two advantages. He had been Army Chief of Staff, so he'd had the top senior position. But the big advantage, of course, is the MacArthur aura, the cult of personality that he cultivates brilliantly. That's the one thing he does well, John, at that point in the war, is cultivate the cult of personality, which is, of course, quite political, as you said, and but also quite meaningful. I mean, FDR understood that reality as much as anybody. And that's where the Medal of Honor comes from, and all this sort of lionization of the man.
Malarkey.
It really is.
By the way, if anyone is interested in the Army in the Pacific, can you recommend maybe a trilogy they can read?
Trilogy out there, maybe.
Which I have used. Yeah. Absolutely.
I was thinking of Ian Tolles.
It's much better. It is. The only problem with the Army one, it's written by this clown named McManus.
That's right.
Actually, both of them are very good. I will. I have enjoyed both. So.
Well, we were talking about this though, John. Do you get a lot of pushback from listeners when they hear comments like that, or about MacArthur or other issues? Do you get a lot of pushback?
Not a lot. Most people do chime in, and they will point out what they think is perhaps not that I ever get a little hyperbolic or anything in my statements. That's part of what we're trying to do too, is entertain people, And so, Seth and I definitely get a little wound up from time to time. And MacArthur and Richmond Kelly Turner, and also Admiral Ugaki Matome are some of our favorite targets for unleashing a little vitriol. But that to me illustrates one of sort of the interesting points about history just in general, is that I feel like we're constantly contending with what I would call interpretational pendulums, in that things swing one way and then they swing back. I think that MacArthur had this sort of hagiography about him immediately post-war and even up until the 50s and 60s, and a lot of people just worship the ground he walked on. I think that has now definitely swung back in the other direction, and there are a lot of people that would say, actually his performance was pretty miserable. Who knows? I mean, it may swing back the other way yet again. That is kind of the nature of history, I would say. But yeah, at the moment, to paraphrase our mutual friend Richard Frank, it's important to hate MacArthur, but it's important to hate him for the right reasons.
Love that. And that's such
he had his strengths. We'll give him that. Yeah. There was certainly a lot to admire about MacArthur and his role, but you can find a lot to criticize too.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I will say, having lived in Japan, I look at MacArthur's finest hour is when he is the supreme commander of the Allied powers in Japan. He saves them from starvation, which is incredibly noble. He gives them a really forward-looking constitution and remakes that society in a very positive way, I would argue. I've got some quibbles about how he treats the emperor and kind of shovels a lot of the war crime stuff under the rug. I got problems with that. But, big picture, I think you have to look at his performance there and say, A minus. It was really very enlightened. My problem is I'm writing a book about the 13 months inclusive from December 41 to December 42. And within that context, his performance in the Philippines and also in New Guinea at Bunagona is just terrible. So that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, of course, the book is called Crux of War, and it's all about 1942. It's been years and years in the making. Now, we're going to have you back, for a couple episodes to get deep dive into that. So I don't want to necessarily do that today, but I know that right now you're in the middle of, doing the finishing touches on it, doing some of the editing, which I know is pretty exacting work. So I think that might be interesting for our listeners to hear, like how an author does that. I mean, this has been your baby for years. So where are you with it right now, and how does that work proceed?
Yeah. Well, and I should just start out by saying that I'm a weird edge case in that most authors do not get the privilege of actually laying out and designing their book. But I've got kind of a weird package of skills, I guess I would say, for an historian, in that not only do I do the writing, but I do all of my own maps, and I'm pretty good at Adobe InDesign, and so I can do this. I did that for Shattered Sword as well. So yeah, we're in the middle of doing all that. It's a stupidly big book. You've seen the galley, John. It's 1,256 pages long. It's got 93 pages of end notes, for crying out loud. It's ridiculous because yes, I've been working on this book for 16 years. I very much wanted to be able to get down into the tactical description of the important battles during the year, places like Edson's Ridge and Midway, and then, Stalingrad and Battle of Gazala, so I'm going all over the planet and doing all of this stuff in at least enough detail that I hope people can understand why the outcome of the individual battles is the way it was. I mean, this always in my mind was a battle history. I wanted to understand the battles. So it's a big book. It's so big that what we ended up doing is we divided it into what we call chunks. There are 4 chunks, and each chunk is 3 to 4 months worth of chapters. And so first, my big editor, Tim Bent, who's head of Oxford's trade division, he did sort of a stylistic pass, and then I had to incorporate all of his suggestions. The beauty of it being, of course, that I'm the guy that controls InDesign, and so at the end of the day, do I take all of his suggestions? No, I took like 85% of them. Then it goes through what's known as, the copy editing phase. So there's another editor, and she is doing all of the harder core continuity and fixing a lot of the commas and the other goofs that I make, but also suggesting in some cases, hey, you need to reword this sentence, this thing is not clear. Thank you, Danielle, for having done all that. So I'm 3/4 of the way through those. She still owes me the edits for chunk number 4. That's got to go back in. Once that process gets completed, I've actually already shipped off the first 3 chunks that have been copy edited. Those are now with the proof editor, and the proofer is going through and making sure, again, that there are no typos, there are no misplaced commas, there are none of that kind of stuff. So yeah, we're in the middle of all that.
Yeah.
The other thing I ended up, I'm sorry, go
ahead, John.
I was just going to say, there used to be 125 pages worth of endnotes, and I decided that's ridiculous. And so what I ended up doing is I consolidated all the citations so that there's only one endnote per paragraph, which means I've got to go and take, 3 or 4 citations and combine them. Here's the first 3 words of the quote from General so-and-so, here's the page number here, source page number and all that. So that's what enabled us to bring it down from 125 pages of endnotes down to a mere 93 or whatever that.
And that isn't easy. That's hard to keep track of all that. I can say personally, with a lot of my books, I decided at some point, well, there could be an endnote for every sentence, honestly. And so if I'm really to take this to its extreme, and nobody would want that, of course. And so I decided, and maybe some don't like this, but I understand why, but this is the way it has to be done for me, at least. several pages have to go by, and then you can go back and you can look and see what encompassed what created those several pages, and it's you know what I mean, John. It's like so hard to figure out that balance of where you do that, and I know that's really exacting. And you can then lose, especially as you've written something 6 months ago or something, you can lose shape of where the information came from. And I know for you and me both, it's really important to document everything that we say. So I know that is, I want to just highlight that, for that, to understand that is really difficult to go from that 120 something pages down to 90 to whatever it is going to be. That takes a lot of exacting work and hours.
Yeah, it was a couple of weeks worth of work to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I absolutely echo all the things that you just said. You're absolutely right on the money. I make very sure when I'm doing the work in the first place that I am citing where I'm getting all this stuff. Because again, 16 years, I'm not going to remember where the hell that source came from. There's no way. And I never use opsit or ibid. Those are the kiss of death, because if you end up moving this sentence over to that paragraph or whatever, and you end up forgetting where it came from, now you're screwed, and you got to go back and go through all the 8 to 10 sources that are the likeliest candidates that it may have come from. That's happened on 1 or 2 occasions, but not as much as it would have if I had been sloppy in the citation to start with.
And IBID just tells me that you've had too many endnotes. I mean, because you're citing the same thing, for gosh sakes. So just put it together.
Yeah.
That's my, at least.
And I have a question about the maps, because on top of everything else, you're drawing a lot of your maps, which I'm jealous because I could never do that. But tell me, what, as a historian, then, why was that important to you? But also, when you're doing the maps, does it reveal, or did it reveal anything, any patterns to you or relationships that you hadn't really appreciated fully in the writing process that kind of revealed itself when you did these maps?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I will say that the book is richly illustrated. It has over 140 maps. It's got a timeline for every month. I'm super, super visual, and a picture is worth 1,000 words in many cases. And so I take great pride in those maps. And to your point, absolutely, there would be times, not necessarily huge aha moments, but I'll give you an example. Battle of Edson's Ridge on Guadalcanal in September. Just, taking various base maps and laying them over on top of each other, and then realizing that this one unit, a Japanese unit that actually had moved past the ridge, could not have gone in the direction that it was shown on Rich Frank's map. It actually had to have gone over here because of the terrain and the other units that were around it, blah, 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 blah. So there are always little clarifications that come out as a result of that. And I feel that, just spending a lot of time with maps, looking at maps, gives you a much better understanding for how these battles unfolded. I've got a fairly specialized toolkit. Like I say, I had a programmer develop for me a customized interface for the Google Maps API, so that I can take a Google map and I can make these big photo montages. I can take screen caps of all of these shaded relief terrain, because I think that shaded relief is important for helping people understand that this is not just a flat 2D expanse. There are hills here, and that influences things. I can then use little check boxes. I can turn off all of the stuff that I don't want to see. I can get us down to bare terrain with no roads if I want, yada, yada. And then I take these base maps and put them together in Photoshop, make these big montages, bring them into a vector package, add all the unit symbology and all that stuff. I'm a nerd.
It's amazing. I've joked about this before, of my abject and incredibly green-eyed jealousy toward you, someone who actually is talented versus me. I can't even do a stick figure. I couldn't begin to do the software and all that. I've been very fortunate to have an incredible cartographer named Rick, who I've worked with for years on a lot of different projects, and without him, I'd be nowhere. So I just think it's amazing that you have that skill set, and it has to add to the pros too, honestly, because some of the ground you've seen and walked, obviously that helps too. And I have as well, but I couldn't replicate it in a map, but so do you, as you work, Do you interact between the words and the map as you're going, and does it dictate how you've written a lot of these parts of your book?
That's a really interesting question. Yes, in some cases, I would say that for some of the battles in areas that I was less familiar with to start, such as the Mediterranean and the Eastern Front, that, yeah, I'm making maps and writing simultaneously. I'm very nonlinear. And this goes to another point that I think people have misconceptions of how the writing process works. I don't know how it works for you, John, but it's not like I just started at the beginning of the book and I wrote all the way, to the end. I'm very much like, no, I'm fascinated with this one battle right now. I'm going to take a deep dive on this thing, even if it's in the middle of this particular section, and I'll build out, from both sides on that. But having the ability to be reading and looking at maps and then maybe building my own map, just the detail work of crafting that map in many cases helps reinforce, oh yeah, Battle of Alamein, this is where, the 51st Highland Division is. I think that having multiple access ways to put that information into our head, that really does help reinforce how we think about things. If I don't have a picture of where 30 Corps is during the Battle of Alamein, I'm not going to be able to actually remember it when I'm writing about it. So, yeah.
Let me ask, because this is a great year to be a history geek, isn't it? It's 250th anniversary of our nation, but it's also, if I do the math correctly, the 85th anniversary of Pearl Harbor coming up later this year. So, how should we mark that occasion? When the vast majority of the participants have passed on, what will you be doing to kind of mark an 85th anniversary?
That's a great question. Some of that'll be driven by, if there are other people out there that want me to, be helping them mark that occasion, showing up on their podcasts or occasionally getting on airplanes to show up as well. I'm actually weirdly not that driven by anniversaries. I mean, I'm intellectually aware of the fact that, yeah, this is the 85th, but is it any more or less important than the 75th, which I actually was in Pearl Harbor for that one? I think you hit on the most important point, which is when you mentioned that we're running out of personal witnesses to these events at this point. The number of Pearl Harbor veterans that are left alive, I think, is 16 at last I heard. And all of these dudes are over 100 years old at this point. What that brings up from an historiographical standpoint is that we have to transition our source material away from individual accounts and continue mining the resources of either previous interviews that were done with those individuals or looking at the unit histories and that sort of thing. I honestly have never been the kind of guy that Seth is. I have never gone out and interviewed too many people. That's not my shtick. Actually, that's a terrible word to even use. That's not who I am as an historian. I am a big picture, operational level synthesis kind of guy. That's what I do. And I absolutely appreciate the efforts of people like Seth to mine those individual sources, but that's never been me. That's not what I'm about. So, maybe that makes me more detached, not as present with the actual combatants who did those things. I don't know, maybe it makes me a worse person, but I continue to look back at those events at 85 years removed and think that the scholarship on them continues to evolve, continues to move. And it's just that now the source material for those things is going to be transitioning fully to written source material, auditory source material that has been previously recorded, because we're just not going to have those oral accounts anymore.
Yeah, and I mean the daunting thing is really as the participants and witnesses go away, it's the historians then who have to pick up the load to tell the story in a way, and it's a really daunting thing. I mean, we see that on our tours, of course. That's the way it works now, because it's seldom we have a veteran on any of these tours that we do with the World War II Museum. So it falls upon us. But what you have that I think is a unique skill set, just a remarkable grasp of like the hardware and the nuts and bolts of all this, but without getting just into the, like you were saying earlier, the rivet counting. That's just kind of like, because you also do understand the human side too, because you have that sensitivity toward it as well. So it's like, crux of war, when that comes out, people are going to see what I mean. Like, there's this really kind of incisive wit to a lot of what Jon has written, and it's there's a really great understanding. So it's not this dry as dust kind of, oh, here's how the engineers designed that beam in a ship or something. It's not that isn't valuable, but it only takes us so far, right? So the thing I've always wondered, and I don't know if I've ever asked you about this, I mean, right now, I think as we sit here today, I don't know anybody who knows more about the Imperial Japanese Navy and its various ships and the classes and all that.
I do.
I mean, maybe there are people, maybe it's just my limitations, could be, but I'm just telling you, man, I mean, it's just absolutely, it's like the movie Rain Man, where Raymond is counting cards or something. I'm like Charlie Babbitt, like, oh my goodness, how is he doing this? So, and this has been since childhood for you. So where did that come from? I mean, how do you get drawn to the Imperial Japanese Navy as a kid from Indiana, from Terre Haute, right?
Yep.
A professor, and here you are as like the age you could read practically. You're looking at the Imperial Japanese Navy. How did that happen?
I guess I was just hardwired for it. I've always been interested in naval stuff just to begin with. I can remember walking to elementary school in second grade and going past the U.S. Navy recruiting poster and just being immediately drawn to that. I love ships. I've always loved ships. My dad is a retired college English prof. He knew I was crazy about ships, and so he started bringing home a projector and 16 millimeter reel-to-reel of the Victory at Sea series, and was showing them up on our living room wall, for his ship crazy first grader. And then as a fifth grader, I was down in a model store and ran across a model kit, one of those 1/700 scale model kits of a Japanese heavy cruiser. And I built it, and that was like the gateway drug. I just thought this ship was just the coolest looking ship I'd ever seen. It was, and Japanese naval architecture does have a very distinctive vibe to it. I mean, a lot of their ships have got these really interesting recurved clippery kind of bows. I just thought they looked cool as hell. And so, yeah, like I say, I got deep in the weeds. And I think that what we do as historians, certainly what I do, I am more of a synthesis now. I'm a big picture guy, but that sits on a very deep substrate of nerdery that was going on when I was a kid. I was big into tanks, and so I'm, memorizing, the gun for the Panther is, a KWK, blah, blah, blah. It's a 60 caliber long 75 millimeter gun. I mean, I know all that stuff, and it's still sitting back there in my lizard brain, from all those years ago, which means that if I need to, in the course of this book, it's probably going to be in an endnote. But yeah, I got deep in the weeds with the various sources about trying to track down, did Rommel actually have a dozen Martyr 3s within the order of battle there? It's not in any of the divisional TOs. I wonder if it's, held at the corps level, So I go there, but I certainly try not to do that in the main text. As you say, I'm more interested in the personalities and in the overall battle plan, and the fact that Montgomery was just such a very interesting sociopath. That's the kind of stuff we need to be talking about within the context of a very large book that I have to draw people through. There's got to be breadcrumbs and Easter eggs and that kind of stuff to make people at least chuckle, because otherwise you're not going to come with me on this journey. So
yeah, definitely. And because I know some, I won't name names, who, I mean, they know the hardware backwards and forwards. They know that, but when it comes to people, they can't tell you anything.
Right.
And from my standpoint, people is what interests me in history, and I think that's true of most of us. I just think you have a nice convergence there. But so sadly, we're out of time. It seems like we just got started with you. We're here with, of course, we'll call him Johnny P, Big John, Big Johnny, whatever he wants. His Jonathan Parshall, of course, is his formal name. But it's just absolutely such a pleasure to sit down with you. All around great guy. Thanks for joining us, John.
thank you for having me. I had a great time, and yeah, would love to come back and take some dives with you into various facets of the book when it comes out.
Well, yeah, when the book comes out, we are going to deep dive over the course of 2 episodes. There's going to be plenty to unpack. It's a 1,300 page book roughly. And it's like I've said to him for years, it's his magnum opus, his tour de force, and it's called Crux of War. So look for it in June of 2026, right?
Yep, coming out first week of June.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome.
Thank you.
John Long, please tell us about today's We Salute You.
Today on our We Salute You, we jump up the ladder and honor the highest ranking officer we've ever saluted, a major general. Yet he never commanded troops in battle, never attracted much attention despite his vital work, and frankly, his name was somewhat feared. No American wanted to receive a telegram from him. His name was Major General James A. Ulloa. James Ulloa was born in Washington Territory a few months before it became the state of Washington, and grew up on Army bases there and in Montana, where his father James was an officer. Ulloa Jr. was passed over for a coveted West Point appointment after high school. Instead, he enlisted as a private in the Army. A boyhood friend from Washington, incidentally, did get into West Point, Jonathan Wainwright, who will become very well known to students of the Pacific War later. As a young soldier, James Ulloa passed highly competitive exams to undergo officer training. And in 1904, he was commissioned a second lieutenant, serving over the next few years in Hawaii, the Philippines, and in Texas during the Pancho Villa expedition. Very quickly, Ulloa developed a stellar reputation for efficient administration, not the sort of service that attracts much attention, but absolutely vital to the Army's success. Around World War I, he served briefly with the 29th Division, where he designed the iconic blue and gray divisional patch, and then in the occupation of Germany and with the American Relief Administration. By the late 1920s, he was an aide-de-camp for President Herbert Hoover, and he retained that post into FDR's presidency as well. Soon after the U.S. entered World War II, James Ulloa was appointed the Adjutant General of the United States Army. This somewhat invisible but absolutely crucial position has been the Army's top administrative officer since the Revolutionary War. From personnel matters to decorations to pensions, the Adjutant General makes the Army work as an organization so that it can work as a military force. But Ulloa had challenges no one had ever considered before. In the face of this global war, the U.S. Army had to increase from about 270,000 soldiers in 1940 to over 8 million. These men had to be enlisted, numbered, trained, and kept track of. General Ulloa ran the office that would do just that. As Adjutant General, Ulloa oversaw vital components of the U.S. Army. The Army Postal System came under his authority, as did the National Insurance Program for soldiers, the penal system for officers who committed crimes or broke regulations, POW camps in the U.S. for captured enemy soldiers, and many aspects of Army training and education. It was James Ulloa who had to create a system to accommodate the new Women's Army Corps, as well as an immense influx of African American soldiers into the Army. While the Army remained segregated through World War II, many credit Ulloa with laying the groundwork for integration afterwards, when he decreed that such things as buses and theaters on Army bases would be desegregated immediately. But maybe most notable and most feared by millions of American families was his role in notifying loved ones when a soldier was wounded, missing, captured, or killed. Thousands of telegrams had to be sent every day of the war, beginning with the words, "The Secretary of War desires to express his deep regret," and ending with Ulloa's name. While the adjutant general did many press interviews and public speeches, the vast majority of Americans who knew his name learned it from a telegram, delivering crushing news. While such telegrams had to be terse and could appear unfeeling to some, Julio was a lifelong soldier, and he understood that his office had to handle such devastating affairs with delicacy and sympathy. There are many reasons why the United States Army was an unrivaled military force during World War II, but one of the most understated reasons is that, for all the frustration of soldiers over snafu situations, it was a highly organized and efficient machine. And it was largely Major General James Julio who led the organizational machinery. Julio retired in 1946 and worked for a nationwide supermarket chain using his inestimable organizational skills in business. He also served as a board member for a large life insurance company. He died in 1958 and was buried in Arlington National Cemetery. Today, his name is not well known among the many American generals of World War II, but few had as far-reaching influence as he did. Major General James A. Julio, we salute you. Thank you for your impressive service, and thank you for doing your part to save the world.
Yeah, I mean, wow. I've seen his name so many times, hundreds of times on those telegrams. But you know what strikes me, how he influences us to this day, the adjutant general was basically the collecting point for the history that they gathered in World War II.
Yes,
you know,
very
for the
true.
traffic reports, unit records, and all that. And he's basically overseeing that. And then, unfortunately, that's the thing that went away in the, I think, the early 1990s. The adjutant general has the kind of oversight for units to give their records, their historical records. And so it became much more haphazard and has been ever since, unfortunately.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah. So Julio, of course, is not a common name. And a lot of Americans would get these telegrams and they thought it was some sort of code at the bottom. And one of their first questions, what does Julio mean? But yeah.
I could see that because it does stand out to you. It's like, that's weird. Like, what is that name?
So he started adding adjutant general to his signature, so it would be a little less confusing. But
a wise idea, because otherwise, it's like, what is this? What am I looking at?
Yeah,
interesting.
Yeah. Well, fascinating stuff, J-Lo. And our guest today, of course, has been the amazing Jon Parshall. I want to thank you again for joining us. It's been so much fun to hang out with you again.
Absolutely delighted. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, thanks one and all. Well, you can email our team at podcast@dday.org. Again, that's podcast@dday.org. We love hearing from you. If you're enjoying our discussions in World War II and its lasting impact, please subscribe to this podcast, share it with your friends, rate it, leave us a review. Help us share the lessons and legacies of D-Day and World War II. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Take care.
Someone Talked is a production of the National D-Day Memorial Foundation, recorded at Media Squatch in Bedford, Virginia. The views expressed are not necessarily those of the foundation, studio, or sponsors. Promotional consideration for Someone Talked is provided by Framatome, an international leader in nuclear energy. Learn more at framatome.com. Explore the National D-Day Memorial, plan your visit, and learn more about our educational programming and upcoming events at dday.org. Join the conversation. Email our team at podcast@dday.org. So long from all of us at Someone Talked.